future doesn't have to be like that. If you step on in to the secret kindergarten, showing you that your young children hold the key to understanding the universe, understanding the self, and therefore they hold the key to human freedom. Your child is the gatekeeper. Only you can open the gate, and the secret kindergarten is going to show you how.
Hello, welcome back to the secret kindergarten. This is the grown-ups edition of the secret kindergarten. For episodes for children, there are about 100 or so available from my website, thesecretkindergarten.com. Today's show, we are exploring fairy tales, the why and the how, by following on with fairy tales in the light of spiritual investigation, the lecture by Rudolf Steiner, presented by him in Berlin on the 6th of February 1913. You can check out previous shows in the revolution.radio archives, and you can download my content for grown-up or content for kids, as I had said before, and that stuff is all available on all podcast platforms, on the secretkindergarten.substack.com, on my YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, Odysee, and thesecretkindergarten.com. I think I said that like 5 times. Oh well, it's all about attention, isn't it? If you want to support me, I provide services that you can find on my website, thesecretkindergarten.com. They are legit and they are cheap, and that's all I'll say about that. Thank you for tuning into revolution.radio, the #1 listener-supported radio station in the whole world. So please help support our efforts and airtime by visiting the station's donations section on our website, revolution.radio. And we are talking about today, as I was saying, fairy tales and why they are important. I discovered they were very important when I was teaching, and I read a big giant storybook of, literally it was a physically giant picture book, one of those big ones, and it was Jack and the Beanstalk, and because it was symbolic in that the book was so big, it was saying, look at me and pay attention to me and what this is all about. And obviously the story was edited, which I resented. I knew it was edited from what little I knew about fairy tales, other than, that innate connection that we're unraveling here about fairy tales, that we are deeply connected to them, whether we really understand them or not. And just what unfolded in the center from the extreme interest and attachment to that fairy tale that pursued from reading it that first time. And enough about that. Let's just get into it, because there's a lot more of the lecture to read. So this will take us 3/4 of the way through the show. So let's just get started, and hopefully we can understand what's going on. I say we because I'm bringing you down with me. With Rudolf Steiner, either I don't understand what he's saying, or I agree with him completely once I understand it. So let's see how much we understand. There's that we again. Okay. Following on from his observations of Rumpelstiltskin, the correspondences he is finding are very deep, very, very deep, and related to. So Rumpelstiltskin had the lady had a helper. Gosh, I'm struggling this morning, but the I think she was the princess, locked in the room, having to weave things out of gold. She had a helper, and that Rudolf Steiner explained how that corresponds to. He didn't say explicitly guardian angel, but he said a helper that we have internally that allows us to achieve great things, or guides us to achieve great things, or get through struggles in a way that we wouldn't have known how otherwise. Okay, so let's continue. Take it away, Rudolf Steiner. Or let us take another fairy tale. Please do not take it amiss. However, if I connect this with matters having an apparently personal tinge, though not at all meant in a personal sense, the essential point will become clear in adding a few observations. Sip of my coffee. In my esoteric science, you will find a description of world evolution. It is not my intention to talk specifically about this now. That can be left for another occasion. Phew! In this world evolution, our Earth is spoken of as having gone through certain stages as a planet in the cosmos, comparable to human lives that follow one upon the other, just as the individual human being goes through lives that follow each other sequentially. So our Earth has gone through various planetary life stages, various incarnations. So that's the law of correspondence there, folks, right? The human body going through various incarnations, and the planet going through various incarnations. In spiritual science, we speak for certain reasons of the Earth as having gone through a kind of moon existence before beginning its Earth existence. And prior to this, a kind of sun existence. Thus, we may speak of a sun existence, a planetary predecessor existence of our Earth existence, as having been present in a primeval past. An ancient sun, with which the Earth was still united. Then, in the course of evolution, a splitting off of sun and Earth took place. From what had originally been sun, the moon separated itself off as well. And our sun of today, which is not the original sun, but only a piece of it, so to speak. Thus we may speak, as it were, of the original sun and of its successor, the sun of today. And we may also refer to the moon of today as a product of the old sun. If spiritual scientific investigation follows the evolution of the Earth retrospectively to where the second sun, the sun of today, developed as an independent cosmic body, it has to be said that at that time, of the creatures that might have been externally perceptible to the senses, among the animals, only those existed that had developed to the stage of the fishes. So yeah, this is heavy stuff. This is very typical Steiner. Okay, so retrospective, because that's how he believes we should be looking at things retrospectively to understand things moving forward. And quite literally, because he says spiritual science, right? So scientifically describing, in this instance, the law of vibration, the connectedness of everything. So that's his way of and I'm just going to admit that I don't understand what is being said there. Thank you for tuning in to the Secret Kindergarten, where I don't know things a lot of the time. Oh my goodness. Okay. But I picked up on, this is his way of explaining the connectedness of things and the law of vibration. I don't get how he deducted that the sun is the second sun. Okay, so let's keep going. These things can all be looked up more precisely in esoteric science. They can be discovered only by means of spiritual scientific investigation. At the time they had been discovered and written down by me in esoteric science, the fairy tale in question was quite unknown to me. That is the personal factor I should like to add here. I am able to establish with certainty that it was quite unknown to me, since I only later came across it in Wilhelm Wundt's Ethnic Psychology, whose sources I only then followed up further. Before briefly outlining the fairy tale, I should like to say one thing in advance. Everything the spiritual researcher is able to investigate in this way in the spiritual world, and the things just referred to, do have to be investigated in the spiritual world, since they are otherwise no longer extant. Everything investigated in this way presents a world with which the human soul is united, even so. So we are connected with this world in the deepest recesses of our souls. All right. So I'm thinking of an example of the correspondences between the chakras and the planets. Okay? So maybe we are understanding things here, okay? It is always present. Indeed, we unconsciously enter the spiritual world in normal life upon falling asleep. Our soul is united with it and has within it not only the soul's experiences during sleep, but also those relating to the whole of evolution referred to here. Were it not paradoxical, one would like to say, in the unconscious state, the soul knows of this and experiences itself in the ongoing stream issuing from the original sun, and subsequently from the daughter sun we now see shining in the sky, as well as from the moon, also a descendant of the original sun. And in addition, the soul experiences the fact that it has undergone an existence, soul spiritually, in which it was not yet connected with earthly matter, in which it could look down on earthly processes, for instance, on the time in which the fish species were the highest animal organisms, where the present sun, the present moon arose and split off from the earth, in unconscious regions. The soul is linked to these events. Okay. I'm starting to get it now. When people weren't here, it was a different sun, and when people were here, it had to have been the second sun. We shall now briefly follow the outline of a fairy tale found among primitive peoples, who tell us there was once a man, a human being he was, however, actually, of the nature of tree resin, and could only perform his work during the night, since, had he carried out his work by day, he would have been melted by the sun. One day, however, it happened that he did go out by day in order to catch fish. And behold, the man who actually consisted of tree resin melted away. His sons decided to avenge him, and they shot arrows. They shot arrows that formed certain figures, towering one over the other, so that a ladder arose, reaching up to heaven. They climbed up this ladder, one of them during the day, and the other during the night. One of them became the sun, and the other became the moon. It is not my habit to interpret such things in an abstract way, and to introduce intellectual concepts, but it is a different matter to have a feeling for the results of investigation, that the human soul in its depths is united with what happens in the world. To be grasped only spiritually, that the human soul is connected with all this and has a hunger to savor its deepest unconscious experiences in pictures. In citing the fairy tale just outlined, one feels a reverberation of what the human soul experienced as the original sun, and as the arising of sun and moon during the fish epoch of the earth. It was in some respects a quite momentous experience for me. This is once more the personal note. When I came across this fairy tale long after the facts I have mentioned stood printed in my esoteric science, though the notion of interpreting the whole matter abstractly still does not occur to me, a certain kindred feeling arises when I consider world evolution in the context of another parallel portrayal, when I give myself up to the wonderful pictures of this fairy tale. I'm assuming he's talking about mental pictures, the imagery that comes up in the mind. Or, as a further example, let us take a peculiar Melanesian fairy tale. Before speaking of this fairy tale, let us remind ourselves that, as shown by spiritual investigation, the human soul is also closely linked to prevailing occurrences and facts of the universe. Even if stated rather too graphically, it is still nonetheless true. In a certain respect, from a spiritual scientific point of view, if we say, when the human soul leaves the physical body in sleep, here's this point again that he makes often, it leads an existence in direct connection with the entire cosmos, feeling itself related to the entire cosmos. We may remind ourselves of the relationship of the human soul, or, for example, of the human I, as in me, oneself, with the cosmos, at least with something of significance in the cosmos. We direct our gaze to the plant world and tell ourselves, the plant grows, but it can only do so under the influence of the sun's light and warmth. We have before us the plant rooted in the earth. In spiritual science, we say the plant consists of its physical body and of the life body which permeates it. But that does not suffice for the plant to grow and unfold itself. For that, the forces are required that work on the plant from the sun. If we now contemplate the human body while the human being sleeps, this sleeping human body is, in a sense, equivalent to a plant. As a sleeping body, it is comparable to the plant in having the same potential to grow as the plant. However, the human being is emancipated from the cosmic order which envelops the plant. The plant has to wait for the sun to exert its influence on it, for the rising and setting of the sun. It is bound to the external cosmic order. The human being is not so bound. Why not? Because what spiritual science points out is in fact true. The human being exerts an influence from the I, outside the physical body, in sleep, upon the plant-like physical body, equivalent to what the sun exerts on the plant. Just as the sun pours its light out over the plants, so does the human I pour its light over the now plant-like physical body when the human being sleeps. As the sun reigns over the plant, so the human I reigns spiritually over the plant-like sleeping physical body. The I of the human being is thus related to the sun existence. Indeed, the I of the human being is itself a kind of sun for the sleeping human body, and brings about its enlivening during sleep. Brings it about that those forces are replenished that have been used up in the waking state. If we have a feeling for this, then we recognize how the human I is related to the sun. Spiritual science shows us, in addition, that just as the sun traverses the arc of heaven, I am of course speaking of the apparent movement of the sun, and in a certain respect the effect of its rays differs according to whether it stands in this or that constellation of the zodiac, so the human I also goes through various phases in its experience. Thus, from one phase it works in one way. From a different phase it works in another way on the physical body. In spiritual science, one acquires a feeling for how the sun works differently onto the earth, according to whether it does so, for example, from the constellation of Aries, or from the constellation of Taurus, and so on. For that reason, one does not speak of the sun in general, but of its effect in connection with the 12 signs of the zodiac, indicating the correspondence of the changing I with the changing activity of the sun. Excuse me. Let us now take everything that could only be sketched here, but which is developed further in esoteric science, as something to be gained as soul spiritual knowledge. Let us regard it as what takes place in the depths of the soul and remains unconscious, but takes place in such a way that it signifies an inner participation in the spiritual forces of the cosmos that manifest themselves in the fixed stars and planets. And let us compare all this proclaimed by spiritual science as the secrets of the universe with a Melanesian fairy tale that I shall again outline only briefly. On a country road lies a stone. This stone is the mother of Quattle, and Quattle has 11 brothers. After the 11 brothers and Quattle have been created, Quattle begins to create the present world. In this world he created a difference between day and night was still unknown. Quattle then learns that there is an island somewhere on which there is a difference between day and night. He travels to this island and brings a few inhabitants from this island back to his country. And by virtue of their influence on those in his country, they too come to experience the alternating states of sleeping and waking, and the rising and setting of the sun takes place for them as a soul experience. It is remarkable what reverberates once again in this fairy tale. Considering the fairy tale as a whole, there re-echoes with every sentence, so to speak, something of world secrets, something of what, in the sense of spiritual science, the soul experiences in its depths. One then has to say, the sources of fairy tale moods, of fairy tales generally, lie in hidden depths of the human soul. There we go. Dramatic pause. Or a Gino is tired pause. A little bit of both. These fairy tales are presented in the form of pictures, since external happenings have to be made use of in order to provide what is to be spiritual nourishment for the hunger that wells up as an outcome of the soul's experiences. Though we are far removed from the actual experiences in question, we can sense how they reverberate in the fairy tale pictures. With this in mind, we need not wonder that the finest, most characteristic fairy tales are those handed down from former ages, when people still had a certain clairvoyant consciousness and found easier access to the sources of these fairy tale moods. Further, it need not surprise us that in regions of the world where human beings stand closer to spirituality than do the souls of the Occident, for example, in India, in the Orient in general, fairy tales can have a much more distinctive character. Neither need we be surprised that in the German fairy tales that Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm collected in the form told them by relatives and others, often simple people, we come upon accounts reminiscent of the periods of European life in which the great heroic sagas arose. Fairy tales contain attributes found in the great heroic sagas. It need not surprise us to hear that it belatedly came to light that the most significant fairy tales are even older than the heroic sagas. Heroic sagas, after all, show human beings only at a particular age of life and in particular situations, while what lives in fairy tales is of a generally human nature, accompanying human beings at every age from their first to their last breath. It need not surprise us if the fairy tale also insistently depicts, for example, what we have referred to as a profound experience of the soul, the feeling of the soul's inadequacy on awakening in regard to the forces of nature it helplessly faces and is only a match for. If it has the consolation of knowing at the same time, within you there is something that transcends your personal self and makes you, in a certain respect, the victor once again over the forces of nature. In sensing this mood, one has a feeling for why human beings so often find themselves up against giants in fairy tales. Why do these giants appear? Well, as an image, these giants arise as a matter of course from the whole tone of the soul in wanting to make its way into the body again in the morning. Seeing itself confronted by the giant forces of nature occupying the body. What the soul senses there as a battle, what it then feels is altogether real. Not in rational terms, but as corresponds to depictions of the manifold battles of the human being with giants. When all this comes to meet it, it clearly senses how it possesses only one thing, its shrewdness. In this whole battle. Its shrewdness in this whole battle. In its stand in confronting giants. For this entails the feeling you could now re-enter your body. But what are you as against the immense forces of the universe? However, you do have something not there in these giants, and that is cunning, reason. This does in fact stand unconsciously before the soul, even if it has also to say to itself that it can do nothing against the immense forces of the universe. We see how the soul transposes this literally into a picture in giving expression to the mood in question. A man goes along a country road and comes to an inn. The inn, he asks for milk soup, blancmange. Flies enter the soup. He finishes eating the milk soup, leaving the flies. Then he strikes the plate, counts the flies he has killed, and brags, 100 at one blow. The innkeeper hangs a sign around his neck. He has killed 100 at one blow. Continuing along the country road, this man comes to a different region. There a king looks out the window of his castle. He sees the man with the sign around his neck and says to himself, I could well use him. He takes him into his service and assigns him a definite task. He says to him, you see, the problem is, whole packs of bears always come into my kingdom. If you have struck 100 dead, then you can certainly also strike the bears dead for me. The man says, I am willing to do it. But until the bears are there, he wants a good wage and proper meals. For, having thought about it, he says to himself, if I can't do it, I shall at least have lived well until then. When the time came and the bears were approaching, he collected all kinds of food and various good things bears like to eat. Then he approached them and laid these things out. When the bears got there, they ate until they were full to excess, finally lying there as though paralyzed. And now he struck them dead, one after the other. The king arrived and saw what he had accomplished. However, the man told him, I simply had the bears jump over a stick and chopped off their heads at the same time. Delighted, the king assigns him another task. He says to him, now the giants will soon also be coming into my land, and you must help me against them as well. The man promised to do so. And when the time approached, he again took a quantity of provisions with him, including a lark and a piece of cheese. On actually encountering the giants, he first entered into a conversation with them about his strength. One of the giants said, "We shall certainly show you that we are stronger," taking a stone and crushing it in his hand. Then he said to the man, "That is how strong we are. What can you do as compared to us?" Another giant took an arrow, shooting it so high that only after a long time did the arrow come down again, and said, "That's how strong we are. What can you do as compared to us?" At this, the man who had killed 100 at one blow said, "I can do all that and more." He took a small piece of cheese and a stone, spreading the stone with cheese, and said to the giants, "I can squeeze water out of a stone." And he squashed the cheese so that water squirted out of it. The giants were astonished at his strength in being able to squeeze water from a stone. Then the man took the lark and let it fly off, saying to the giants, "Your arrow came back down again. The one I have shot, however, goes up so high that it does not come back down at all." For the lark did not return at all. At that the giants were so amazed. They agreed among themselves that they would only be able to overcome him with cunning. They no longer thought of being able to overcome him with the strength of giants. Nonetheless, they did not succeed in outwitting him. On the contrary, he outwitted them. While they all slept, he put an inflated pig's bladder over his head, inside which there was some blood. The giants had said to themselves, "Awake, we shall not be able to get the better of him, so we shall do it while he sleeps." They struck him while he slept, smashing the pig's bladder. Seeing the blood that splurted out, they thought they had finished him off, and they soon fell asleep. In the peaceful quiet that overcame them, they slept so soundly that he was able to put an end to them. Even though, like some dreams, the fairy tale ends here somewhat indefinitely, and on an unsatisfactory note, we nonetheless have before us a portrayal of the battle of the human soul against the forces of nature. First against the bears, then against the giants. But something else becomes evident in this fairy tale. We have the man who has killed 100 at one blow. We have an echo of what lives at the deepest unconscious levels of the soul. The consolation in becoming aware of its own shrewdness over against these stronger, overwhelming forces. It is not a good thing when what has been presented artistically in pictures is interpreted abstractly. That is not at all what matters. On the other hand, nothing of the artistic form of the fairy tale is diminished if one has a feeling for the fact that the fairy tale is an after echo of events taking place deep within the soul. These events are such that we can know a great deal about them, as much as one can come to know by means of spiritual investigation. Yet, in immersing ourselves in fairy tales and experiencing them, they still remain original and elementary. In researching them, it is certainly agreeable to know that fairy tales present what the soul needs, on account of its deepest experiences, as we have indicated. At the same time, no fairy tale mood is destroyed in arriving at a deeper recognition of the sources of subconscious life. Presented only abstractly, we find that these sources are impoverished for our consciousness, whereas the fairy tale form is really the more comprehensive one for expressing the deepest experiences of the soul. It is then comprehensible that Goethe expressed in the significant and evocative pictures of the fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily what he was abundantly able to experience, and which Schiller chose to express in abstract philosophical concepts. Thus, despite having thought a great deal, Goethe wanted to say in pictures what he felt concerning the deepest underlying strata of human soul life. And because the fairy tale relates in this way to the innermost soul, it is precisely the form most suited to the child. For it may be said of fairy tales that they have brought it about that what is most profound in spiritual life is expressed in the simplest possible form. In fact, one gradually comes to feel that in all conscious artistic life, there is no greater art than that which completes the path from the uncomprehended depths of soul life to the delightful, often playful pictures of the fairy tale. An art capable of expressing in the most self-evident form what is hard to comprehend is the greatest and most natural art. An art intimately related to the human being, and just because in the case of the child, the essential human being is still united in an unspoilt way with the whole of existence, with the whole of life, the child especially needs the fairy tale as nourishment for its soul. What depicts spiritual powers can come alive more fully in the child. The childlike soul may not be enmeshed in abstract theoretical concepts if it is not to be obliterated. It has to remain connected with what is rooted in the depths of existence. And that is why letting children be children is important rather than indoctrinating children. That is why indoctrination, direct instruction, is not good. Okay, hence, we can do nothing of greater benefit for the soul of the child than in allowing what unites the human being with the roots of existence to act upon it. As the child still has to work creatively on its own physical formation, summoning the formative forces for its own growth, for the unfolding of its natural abilities. It senses wonderful soul nourishment in fairy tale pictures that connect it with the roots of existence, since, even in giving themselves over to what is rational and intellectual, human beings can still never be wholly torn away from the roots of existence. They gladly turn again at every age to the fairy tale, provided they are of a sufficiently healthy and straightforward soul disposition. For there is no stage of life and no human situation that can estrange us altogether from what flows from fairy tales, in consequence of which we could cease having anything more to do with what is more profound in human nature, or have no sense for what is so incomprehensible for the intellect, expressed in the self-evident, simple, primitive fairy tale and fairy tale mood. Hence, those who have concerned themselves for a long time with restoring to humanity the fairy tales that had been rather glossed over by civilization, individuals such as the Brothers Grimm understandably had the feeling, even if they did not adopt a spiritual scientific view, that they were renewing something that belongs intimately to human nature. After an intellectual culture had done its part over a period of centuries to estrange the human soul, including the soul of the child, such collections of fairy tales as those of the Brothers Grimm have quite properly found their way again to all human beings receptive for such things. In this way, they have become once more the common heritage of children's souls. Indeed, of all human souls. They will do so increasingly. The more spiritual science is not just taken as theory, but becomes an underlying mood of the soul, uniting it more and more in feeling with the spiritual roots of its existence. In this way, by means of the dissemination of spiritual science, what genuine fairy tale collectors, those truly receptive for fairy tales as well as those who present them have declared will prove well-founded. This is what a certain individual, a true friend of fairy tales, often said in lectures I was able to hear. It is a wonderfully poetic utterance which at the same time summarizes what results from such spiritual scientific considerations as we have presented today. It may be formulated in words. This man spoke, knowing as he did how to love fairy tales, collecting them and appreciating them. He always liked to add the saying, fairy tales and sagas are comparable to a good angel, granted human beings as a companion from birth on their life's wanderings, to be a trustworthy comrade throughout, offering comradeship and making life inwardly into a truly ensouled fairy tale. And there ends Rudolf Steiner's lecture, Fairy Tales in Light of Spiritual Investigation. And there we go. You get to the end and it kind of bundles up quite nicely, and I'm just going to read you a little bit here from Fairy Tales, Their Origin and Meaning, with some account of dwellers in Fairyland, by John Thackray Bunce. And this is from a little bit before. Wow. This is from 1878. 35 years before Steiner's lecture on fairy tales. This was also presented as a lecture. Okay, so let's just read a little bit here. The nations who have fairy tale can be traced back to Aryan, Indo-Germanic, Indo-European race. Oh no, this is not reading. What am I doing here? Oh, wakey, Gino. Okay, so John Thackray Bunce is the author of Fairy Tales, Their Origin and Meaning, with some account of dwellers in Fairyland. It was presented as a lecture in 1877, and this was published as a book in 1878. And yes, he's exploring the origin of fairy tales. Okay, so this is another account of the origin of fairy tales. And John Thackray Bunce states in his lecture/book that the fairy tale can be traced back to the Aryan race, which is Indo-Germanic, Indo-European. And the Aryan race took deeper meaning through what they saw in the sky. For example, they saw things as symbols, and they acknowledged the sun as a sky father. They acknowledged the clouds as sky cows who would excrete milk on the earth, which was the rain, for example. And the author here believes that fairy tales trace back to ancient Hindu and Persian texts, and essentially that the fairy tale can be traced back as far as we can trace back our origins, basically. So let's just read a little bit. We've got a few more minutes left. Here we go. We're reading from the book. The mind of the Aryan peoples in their ancient home was full of imagination. They never ceased to wonder at what they heard and saw in the sky and upon the earth. Their language was highly figurative, and so the things which struck them with wonder and which they could not explain were described under forms and names which were familiar to them. Thus the thunder was to them the bellowing of a mighty beast or the rolling of a great chariot. In the lightning they saw a brilliant serpent, or a spear shot across the sky, or a great fish darting swiftly through the sea of cloud. The clouds were heavenly cows who shed milk upon the earth and refreshed it. or they were webs woven by heavenly women, who drew water from the fountains on high and poured it down as rain. The sun was a radiant wheel, or a golden bird, or an eye, a shining egg, a horse of matchless speed, or a slayer of the cloud dragons. Sometimes it was a frog, when it seemed to be sinking into or squatting upon the water. And out of this fancy, when the meaning of it was lost, there grew a Sanskrit legend, which is to be found also in Teutonic and Celtic myths. This story is that Becky, the frog, was a lovely maiden who was found by a king, who asked her to be his wife. So she married him, but only on condition that he should never show her a drop of water. One day she grew tired and asked for water. The king gave it to her, and she sank out of his sight. In other words, the sun disappears when it touches the water. This imagery of the Aryans was applied by them to all they saw in the sky. Sometimes, as we have said, the clouds were cows. They were also dragons, which sought to slay the sun, or great ships floating across the sky and casting anchor upon the earth, or rocks, or mountains, or deep caverns, in which evil deities hid the golden light. Then also they were shaped by fancy into animals of various kinds, the bear, the wolf, the dog, the ox, and into giant birds and monsters, which were both bird and beast. The winds, again in their fancy, were the companions or the ministers of Indra, the sky god. The Maruts, or spirits of the wind, gathered into their host the souls of the dead, thus giving birth to the Scandinavian and Teutonic legend of the wild horseman, who rides at midnight through the stormy sky, with his long train of dead behind him, and his weird hounds before, the ribus or arbus again, were the sunbeams or the lightning, who forged the armour of the gods, and made their thunderbolts, and turned old people young, and restored out of the hide alone the slaughtered cow on which the gods had feasted. Out of these heavenly artifices, the workers of the clouds, there came in later times two of the most striking stories of ancient legend, that of Thor, the Scandinavian thunder god, who feasted at night on the goats which drew his chariot, and in the morning by a touch of his hammer brought them back to life, and that of Orpheus in the beautiful Greek legend, the master of divine song, who moved the streams and rocks and trees by the beauty of his music, and brought back his wife Eurydice from the shades of death. In our Western fairy tales we still have these ribus or arbus, transformed through various changes of language into albs and elfin, and last into our English elves. It is not needful to go further into the fanciful way in which the old Aryans slowly made ever-increasing deities and superhuman beings for themselves out of all the forms and aspects of nature. But as we shall see later, all these creatures grew out of one thing only, the sun, and his influence upon the earth. There we go. So, there's a connection there. Rudolf Steiner dives into fairy tales in spiritual, scientific way, cosmic way, where he mentions the soul separating from the body at sleep, and the correspondence between that individuality of each individual human soul corresponding to the sun, and that where it really explains that we are of God, or we are of the Creator, and we have that power to come back into the body. We have this magical aspect of ourselves, and what we can see inherent in nature is observable, and that going deeper into that, we discover what is probably called natural law, right? So that's that. Fairy tales. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you at the next one. I love you. Bye.